dear colleagues. This is a catch-up meeting or recording, rather, after our standardization exercises. I managed now to have a look at your responses to the exercises, and I would like to just very briefly go through those responses in general, not mentioning any names whatsoever, but just in general to show you what are the responses and what are the results, and to kind of try to round up this round this stage of standardization exercises which we need to have for both formative as well as summative assessments. Okay, so once again, many thanks for those who have completed this exercise, as well as those who have resubmitted responses after reading again the assessment procedure. So it's much appreciated. Okay, now I'm going to start with the standardization exercise for pre-formative marking, or for formative marking, if you like. There were three questions there. The first one really got 100% success rate, if you like. So all of you have responded correctly to the question, what is the basis for the effective formative assessment? So everyone agreed that having to structure your comments as questions and suggestions is an advantage for the student, and this is how we should provide formative feedback, which is great. Moving on to the next question, how can you encourage the student to learn more? 87%, 87.5 to be precise percent of all the responses were correct, which is great, i.e. That we can encourage the student to learn more by recognizing their experience in the feedback, their past experience, and so forth, which is great, because some of them might not have had a good experience in education, and if we are too forceful at the formative stages, or if we are too prescriptive at those stages, then they will probably withdraw and and not come back, be afraid of asking questions or contributing to class, and and their learning will be affected. So I'm really happy to see that um, almost all of us have seen that recognizing students' previous experience is a must. However, only 12% of you have thought that a way to encourage students to learn more is to make them feel that they know everything. Well, um, I don't think this is the purpose of formative feedback, to make students feel that they know everything, because really there's no point of them learning anything again. So making students that they feel, making them feel that they know everything is not necessarily the best approach, the best sort of way to deal with this. So I hope you understand that this is not the purpose of the formative assessment. Moving on to the last question for this first exercise. Um, so that is about what matters more during formative feedback. I'm again quite happy to see that majority of you, 87.5% of the whole team, has picked the right answer, which is to identify areas for student progression, including those connected to stretching and challenging students. So this is what matters really more during formative feedback, to identify what the students can do more, how can we stretch their ability to learn, and how we can challenge them to do more, but not just do the same as probably they're used with. Um, Only a few of you have, or to be precise, one of the whole, team, if you like, said that what matters more during formative feedback is to tell students exactly what they have to improve on. Well, obviously, this is not the purpose of any assessment, any feedback we provide, either informative or summative, because that will mean that we are spoon feeding. We are our students. We are just exactly telling them what to do, so they don't have the autonomy, the independence which is needed in learning. So in as a result of telling them exactly what they have to improve on, they will just essentially follow our instructions, almost like a copy and paste, but they will not engage in their own individual learning. So that's, I hope this is again clear, that the purpose of feedback, either formative, interim, halfway through if you like, or summative, is not to tell students exactly what to improve on, because that takes away their responsibility in their own learning. Okay, I hope this is clear. Okay, so that's great. I mean, overall, it's fantastic. Great feedback throughout, and great way in which we can see that we are on the same page, all of us. Okay, now moving on to the second exercise, which is about pre-summative marking. We are approaching now to the stage where we'll need to provide our final feedback, not just formative but final summative feedback for the whole unit. So we have this week's submissions for the May intake, and we'll have very soon at the end of this month, end of November, submissions for the September intake. So we will very soon come to a point where we need to start our assessment, our final assessment for the final student work. Okay, so this is extremely important part. Not just three questions. There were 14 questions for this part, and I'm going to go through your answers. Again, I'm not going to discuss any particular answer, any particular response you gave. I'm not going to use any names. The purpose of this is to standardize our practice across the team. Okay, so the first question was, what can we do to make sure that our summative assessment is valid? So this is around validity of our assessment. Now, I'm happy to see that 87.5% of you have responded correctly, which is the way in which we can make sure that our summative assessment is valid is by signposting all assessment criteria for pass, as well as the grading criteria for merit and distinction, to whole or specific parts of the student work. So really happy to see that majority of us are on the same page. However, 12.5% of you, which actually comes down to literally just one person, one member of our team, thought that a way to make sure that our summative assessment is valid is by uh, signposting clearly only what the student has not done well. Well, in order for that to be valid, obviously this is not enough. It's not only enough to say what the student hasn't done well. We have to actually signpost correctly, all the assessment criteria and grading criteria across the board, across the student work. Okay, so that's, I think we are all by and large in agreement. Moving on to the second question. This one reads, what summative assessment is not about? So what summative assessment is not about? So, well, this question is perhaps was formulated on purpose in a trickier way. So I'm not. You haven't been asked to say what a summative assessment is about, but what is not about. So perhaps this is why we have 37.5% of you of the team picking the unusual or not the right answer, if you like. So what summative assessment is not about, majority of you, 62.5%, pick the right answer, which is summative assessment is not about indicating to students what exactly they need to do in order to achieve a pass. Summative assessment is not about telling the student exactly what they need to do in order to achieve a pass for a resubmission. It's not about that. and I think this is exactly what summative assessment is not about. Uh, some of you have said that summative assessment is not about indicating to students what they have done well. Well, um, this could pose a particular problem, and I really hope that your high percentage of you saying this comes down to the way in which this question was formulated in a trickier way, and I take responsibility for this. But and I hope that we are all clear that the purpose of summative assessment is also to indicate that students have done something well. So we can't only tell them what they haven't done well, but we also have to say you've done well that part or that part. So I hope that your answer only came from a slight misunderstanding of the question. But once again, just to be clear, in summative assessment, we are supposed to tell students what they've done well, what they haven't done well, and so forth. So I hope this is clear. Um, okay, moving on to the next question. How can merit and distinction grades can be awarded? Now, I'm happy to see that 75% of us have indicated that merit and distinction grades can be awarded either sequentially or holistically. Um, some of them have picked only alongside um, specific individual assessment criteria, in other words, sequential, and some of you have said they can only be awarded in connection to the whole task or student work. Well, um, obviously, from majority of you are quite clear about the fact that um, merit and distinction grades are to be awarded either in connection to a particular assessment criteria or in connection to a whole task or for that matter in connection to the whole student work. Some merit criteria are about the structure of the assignment. So if I'm not mistaken, this is M3. So you can award M3 holistically about the good structure overall of the student work. Some other grade descriptors, if you like, for merit are around references. So obviously this is not only connected to one particular task or assessment criteria, but it's connected to the whole student work, as also mentioned in the assessment procedure. Now, um, sometimes, obviously, you can award, you give, you give a merit or distinction only based on the learning on one particular assessment criteria, and that will be sequential, so alongside an individual assessment criteria. So in 1.1, the student was able to show good judgment. So that will be M1, I think. One characteristic of M1 is making good judgments, and so forth. You know the rest. So I think we've done exceptionally well here in this question. By and large, I'm pretty confident that we are all on the same page. Moving on, because we still have a few questions to go through, and this is a very interesting question. So the question reads as following. So it says, is the following statement about our feedback true or false? So I'm really, I was really interested to see here your um, judgment, if you like, about the following statement. Is it true or false? So the statement is, we need to indicate to students exactly what to do and not just to mention which information learners could have drawn from, for example, class notes, handouts, resources from the assignment brief. Now, the question is it true or false that we need to indicate to students exactly what they need to do and not just to mention which information they could have drawn from? Now, 75% of you said this statement is true, and only 25% of you said this statement is false, which indicates to me that it seems that majority of our team thinks that we it's actually we have to indicate to students exactly what to do through our summative um, feedback. This could pose a potential problem, and this is really a sticking point. We need to make sure, and I'll make a question I'll put forward a question in the email you'll see, or you have just read from me about your agreement on this issue, because if we don't agree on this issue, we might have a problem, and I might not be, we might not be comfortable with some of your decisions, assessment decisions. Um, just to be clear, as it was also written in the assessment procedure in accordance to Pearson as well as QA guidelines, we are not supposed to, and I repeat, we are not supposed to indicate to students exactly what to do in our assignment, or through our formative as well as summative feedback. Again, this is an extremely important point, which also was mentioned in the previous exercise as an important issue. I would like to draw your attention to this very important point. And I repeat once again that we don't need to indicate to students exactly what to do. So this statement was actually false. We don't need to indicate to students exactly what to do. I hope you are in agreement. I will seek your agreement by email as well, because we need to, before we start our summative feedback, we all have to be in agreement with this. Okay, I hope you're okay with this. Thank you. Moving on to the next question, which says, are we allowed to use I as a term in providing feedback? Happy to see that majority of you have said yes. So yes, of course, we shouldn't be okay to use I. I believe, I think. Marking assessment should be objective, is true, but we shouldn't be losing that personal touch. We should address the student by the name, using their names, and we should be personal, direct. And at the end of the day, our judgment as assessors is individual, is subjective. We are standardizing and moderating our answers through this type of exercises, but at the end of the day, our judgments are subjective, and personal, and maintaining that first person is very important. I'm happy to see that you agree with this as well. Okay, moving on to the next question. I can see that 87.5% of you have chose the right question, the right answer. So it's necessary to structure your feedback as questions and or suggestions to probe assumptions by seeking evidence to support learners' reflection and self-assessment. Yes, you said yes, majority of you, which is great. Moving on to the next one. It is a requirement or highly desirable to rephrase the paper's main points by building on the students' main ideas. Half of you said is highly desirable, which is the right question. This is not a requirement to rephrase the main points by building on student main ideas, and clearly it's not a requirement, so it can't be both. So it can't be a requirement or highly desirable at the same time. So it's highly desirable, not a requirement, to rephrase the main points of the student work when we provide feedback. And the purpose of this, is highly desirable. The purpose of this is that we are supposed to reach to the mind of the learner in a clear way, in a direct way. And one way of doing it is just one way of doing it. That's why it's not a requirement, it's just highly desirable. One way of doing this is by using uh, students' main ideas and repackaging, if you like, rewriting those, paraphrasing those ideas in our own language, because that's the connection between what we say and what the students believe or think or feel they should do could be made a lot quicker. Okay. Now, moving on to the next question, we have still a few to go through. Um, reads the following. Is it a requirement or highly desirable to use students' work experience in your feedback for either pass, merit, or distinction? Again, the question is between a requirement or highly desirable. Um, obviously is not um, a requirement, as some of you have said. Majority of you, and I'm very pleased to see this, have said it depends on the requirement of the unit. Obviously, if it's unit 4, personal and professional development, it will be a requirement, not just highly desirable, for for us to reflect in our feedback the student work experience. So it's highly not just recommended, it's not just highly desirable, it's a requirement that we have to meet, but that depends on the unit. So I'm happy to see that you see that quite clearly there. Now, moving on to the next one, it is it a requirement or highly desirable to recognize and clarify students' thought processes? So, um, you know, majority of you said it's highly desirable. Some of you said it's a requirement. It's not a requirement to clarify their thought processes. It's just highly desirable. It helps them with their learning, but it's not a requirement from the awarding organization. What they require is for us to make good decisions about pass merit distinction, essentially. Okay, moving on to the next question, which was not a multiple choice, was just inviting you to have your say. The question reads as following: how can we use student feedback, peer feedback, and contribution on learning communities in our feedback for merit and distinction? So the question read as: how can we use student peer feedback and contributions from their communities, including classwork, in our feedback? How can we use, not why, not what, but how can we use? Now, I I, I struggled a bit here to find a good answer, to be honest. I think the best answer is not entirely correct, but is the best answer I could see is this one, which I'm highlighting now, and it says use students' peer feedback and contributions on learning communities in feedback for merit or distinction criteria for summative. Um, and also, actually, to be entirely fair, is the next one. So there are two answers. Sorry, not just one. If the student has been actively participating in peer activities, share ideas with colleagues and teach colleagues, as well as reflecting on own experience. So I think between these two answers, we have a glimpse, an idea of how, again, this is the question here, how can we use student peer feedback in our own feedback to them. So ideally will be to spot how they share ideas and support other colleagues, either teach them or support them with their work, and then use that in our feedback. So between, if you like, the third answer from the top and the fifth one, we can have an idea about best practice on how we can use students' feedback. The rest of the answers are either incomplete or they are quite descriptive. I'm not actually saying how we can use student peer feedback. Okay, but it's interesting. It's worthwhile to have this conversation anyway. And perhaps we'll organize another meeting about this. When the similarity percentage is 35 or above, the student work is plagiarized. So I'm asking you, is it true, false, or it depends? I'm happy to see that majority of you said it depends. So when the similarity percentage is 35 or above, the student work is not necessarily plagiarized. So I'm happy to see that majority of you have picked that as the correct answer. Moving on to the next question, and I promise I have only a few, I'm sure you already know, to go through. If the similarity percentage is 35, and you see that this comes from 35 or more sources of information, has the student plagiarized? Well, majority of you said no, which is the correct answer. I'm happy to see 62.5. However, 37.5% of you said it depends. Well, it doesn't depend. It actually is not indicating plagiarism. 35% coming from 35 sources of information or more is not plagiarism. It indicates that perhaps 1% comes from one source and another percent comes from another source. That indicates that maybe the student hasn't hasn't managed to reference properly, and it doesn't mean that the student has plagiarized. Um, the next question will be, if the similarity percentage is 35% and you see that this comes from 2 or 3 sources of information, has the student plagiarized? Well, this is a problem. This is an interesting question, but your responses, demand, a bit of discussion here. So, um, you said, so the question again is, if the similarity percentage is 35, you can see that this comes from 2 or 3 sources of information, has the student plagiarized? Well, 50% of you, half of you said yes. Yeah. So the question being, if the similarity percentage is 35 and you see that this comes from 2 or 3 sources of information, has the student plagiarized? Well, yes. If the student has 35% similarity and let's say from 2 sources coming, 17% coming from one source, 17% coming from another source, 17.5 coming from another source, it's quite clear that the student has plagiarized, has taken 17% from copy and paste from one particular source, and that's not acceptable. That's really not acceptable, and it's plagiarism. Okay, even when you have 3 sources of information, let's say 10%, 10%, and 5% coming, 10% taking copy and paste from one particular source is not acceptable. That becomes obvious when you have, let's say, 1,000-word assignment, and 35% of that 1,000 words being taken from other sources, and 10% of that being taken, like 100 words, let's say, at least taken from one particular source. So you'll have a big chunk, almost a paragraph, coming from one article which is not being acknowledged, is not being referenced, and that's plagiarism. And we have to make sure we pick those examples up, and we don't just say, well, it depends. That's really not acceptable. And that becomes quite obvious when, let's say, we have a 5,000 words assignment or 10,000. I know we don't have 10,000, but when we have a 3,000 or 5,000 word assignments, that becomes really apparent, because when you have a 17%, almost 20% of the student work being taken from a source, from one particular source, that becomes, from 100 words, it jumps to a higher number. You do the maths, but it could be even a whole page throughout that assignment being copy and paste. It could be even a chapter or subchapter taken from another source which hasn't been acknowledged. So this is extremely important we get this right. The 35% coming from 2 or 3 sources of information is considered plagiarism. I hope you agree with that. Okay, moving on. If the similarity percentage is 20% and this comes from 1 or 2 sources of information, what would this be classed as plagiarism? Well, I'm happy to see that majority of you said yes. So even though the similarity percentage is 20%, we shouldn't automatically think that, well, this is low. It doesn't mean that the person or the student or whoever has plagiarized. Well, this is not true, and I'm happy to see that you're also recognizing this. We need to check how many sources of information that comes from. If it's just 1 or 2 sources of information from where 20% comes from, obviously that's plagiarism, and it doesn't depend on anything. 20% coming from one source of information, as already mentioned in the previous answer, is not acceptable, and it's plagiarism, and it could be extremely dangerous if we accept a work like this. Okay. Now, moving on to the last question, you'll be happy to see, if you judge, so the question is, if you judge that the work has been plagiarized, do you still need to provide feedback to the student? I'm really happy to see that majority of you said yes. Yes, we are still in a position to provide feedback to students. They need our feedback even when they have plagiarized, and the reason for this will be for them to correct their work in the future. So Answers like no, we don't have to provide feedback to the students when they have plagiarized are incorrect, and I hope you understand why they are. We still have to provide feedback to students, even though the feedback will be quite minimal, a few sentences that will make the point. But that point has to be made so the student understands why they have plagiarized, why it's not okay to plagiarize. Perhaps we can even invite them for a quick chat, a conversation, or an interview if needed with a panel from the college to establish the facts, the truth behind that high similarity percentage or low sometimes. Okay, so I hope this is useful. I'm really happy with all this. By and large, I think as a team we are standardized and we are ready to start the marking. I will urge you to give a quick answer, agreement, yes, no, to the questions I sent to you by email already. And those questions are mainly around those issues we have identified coming from your answers. No major problems, no worries, if you like, on our part as a team. We are doing fantastically well, and I really want to thank you again for the hard work. It's just a few things we have to align ourselves. That's all. I hope this is okay. I hope you find this useful. I will post this video on our OneDrive, so you will be able to find this on OneDrive in our team meetings. You'll be able to find this video somewhere here during delivery. It will be a video in November, yeah, so you'll be able to find this video and watch it again if you want from there. Okay, I hope this is okay. Thank you so much. It took a bit longer than I wished, but I hope this is clear to everyone. Thank you. See you around. Cheers. Bye.